Welcome again to the podcast where we talk bags. I'm Marlon Vandermeer, but you might know me as the Bag Father.
And I'm Jen Zemba.
In this podcast series, we will be talking to everyone involved in aviation about getting your possessions around the world safely.
This is another of our episodes recorded in Chicago at WIllis Tower, the home of United Airlines. Joining us in person is Craig Mosfords, the Capability Manager at TSA Security. The Transportation Security Administration is an agency of the United States Department of Homeland Security that has authority over the security of transportation systems within and connecting to the United States. It is responsible for screening passengers and baggage at more than 450 U.S. airports, employing screening officers, explosive detection dog handlers, and bomb technicians in airports.
You're responsible within the TSA for baggage. Me as the Bag Father and my family, we try to bring everything on board. Everything. Tell me more. The TSA started just after 9/11, 25 years ago. What changed?
What changed? Well, since our inception, we've had many security regulations implemented. We've had lots of equipment, innovation, all kinds of things that have led up to the point now where we are screening nearly 3 million passengers a day. I think what has changed is not only the perception of are we traveling in the times of 9/11 or in the shadow of 9/11, are people forgetting why we're there at the airport?
I'm definitely not forgetting. I think the listeners should know. You took me to this tour in Springfield and your headquarters. What people trying to take.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that? What the listeners probably don't even know.
So in our shift of our headquarters building from the Arlington, Virginia area into the Springfield, Virginia area, we have a large building now where we went from 5 buildings in the Washington area down to now only 1 or 2 buildings. But we've also incorporated, as you said, a museum that's been dedicated to why does the TSA exist?
It blew me away.
And you both have seen it. It's incredible. I think it's an opportunity for one to take a self-guided tour or have someone that they perhaps know at TSA to bring them through. It recounts, why was aviation security even thought of? Why did it need to be brought to the airport? And then the shift from FAA and the airlines' responsibilities of passenger screening to the TSA. And then we also incorporated the baggage screening, as you're aware, which was implemented shortly after the inception of TSA. So it's an incredible job. Really, it's hard to do everything, and working with the general public every day as a TSO, for example, it's something that they really want to have to do, or they feel like they have to do. Something within them maybe is pushing them to do the job, because touching people and getting involved in their personal space and that kind of thing isn't probably their first love of the job, I'm just going to say, right? And so I'm going to guess that there's a personal drive. Like for me, I can speak for me, right? So I had time in the airlines prior to 9/11. So it was very personal to me, the 9/11 attacks. Having been a trainer and taught ground security coordinator classes, which the airlines have to have, it was just something I wouldn't have even imagined that could happen. So as a result of that, I wanted to take that kind of anger and frustration and put it to good use.
For me, it's necessary evil to go through the TSA, but once you see what people try to bring on board, it makes you feel much safer. Since I visited your museum, I'm okay with everything. What kind of issues is the TSA facing on a daily basis when it comes to your reason of existence? What do people try to bring on board?
People are, and I alluded to it earlier, I don't know if they've forgotten or if it's the next generation of people that don't necessarily identify. 9/11 wasn't a part of their recent memory or, recollection like it is for us that were around at that time. They're bringing in their sharp instruments or, I hate to say knives, but again, we still see plenty of knives. We had, I think, an incident with box cutters a year and a half ago or something like that. It's driven by, I think, just ignorance, people not knowing and having been around during that time.
And they don't have bad intentions with those things, so they don't think they're doing anything wrong.
Largely they don't, you're right. Now there is things that are prohibited like drugs and that kind of thing. I do think we do see some of that, but again, not our mission, right? And that's one of the delicate balances that we have as an agency, I think, is even though that's not our mission, it's up to us to turn that into, it's a side catch. So we turn that into the appropriate authorities and everything. But As Jen said, there's rarely nefarious intent, right? Even though it's largely out there, it's on the web, it's on, airlines remind people all the time. Nowadays, it's the lithium batteries and that kind of thing in baggage, which is more of a hazardous materials item, but it's something that we're getting a little bit of discussion with the FAA, who is charged with the hazardous materials, for example. So again, they're regulating the airlines, right, for that. So they're talking to us about ways that we can help, for example, look for batteries or other items that might pose a hazard to the aircraft as far as hazardous materials. And I think that there's something there in our future.
I would like to understand, what kind of main issues are you facing right now?
Funding's a big part of it. There's personnel, staffing issues. There's having to work with other regulated entities within the aviation sphere. And we try to be all things, even though probably some of the stakeholders and entities are a lot of times probably frustrated in working with us just because we're so thin, as far as spread thin on a number of things, whether it be, staffing that I mentioned or the ability to help with additional equipment or things of that nature. It's a very slow moving process. And so some stakeholders would be frustrated by that.
And that's exactly that we want to know, because we want to know what's going on behind the scene. Because I think all the stakeholders, above all the passengers, will have a lot of patience for your situation and your mission. So how do you cooperate with an airline, for example, right now?
We do, I think, a pretty good job. If airlines are reaching out to us to help solve issues, and let's just say it's more passenger checkpoint centric or something, if an airline is experiencing late passengers or something of that nature, there are a few airports out there that are a little bit difficult to navigate. The setups of having multiple small checkpoints at an airport versus an airport that's laid out where there's maybe one main checkpoint or two main checkpoints or something like that. It helps us to have all of the resources really in one or two spots, because if we're spread out more thinly across an operation, then we can experience difficulties. We can experience shortfalls where we needed the staffing at a particular checkpoint and they weren't there because they were assigned somewhere else. So there still are those internal things that we are still working with. When an airline contacts us to say, hey, we're not getting efficient use of the checkpoint for some reason, we will react to that. For the most part, we feel like the baggage runs very well. And I would say that's not probably their number one gripe with us. It's not usually bags, I don't think, unless you guys know differently.
No, I think there was a point in time, though, that it was a concern, and there was a lot of discussion in the industry about, scanning right before it gets to TSA so that, the finger pointing could take place. And I think that you guys have come a long way since then.
Yeah, thanks for that. I would say it's either a passenger experience issue that an airline is talking to us about, or sometimes equipment in terms of, hey, when are you getting the newest equipment here for us?
Yeah, we have a great question for you from a previous airline guest that asked us to find out when your next iteration of an EDS is coming.
And so that goes right into my job as a capability manager.
But help the listeners a little bit to understand this question. This specific airline asked for the next iteration of an EDS.
Sure.
Explain to the listeners what is meant by that question and why is it so important?
Yeah, so the explosive detection systems that we use, which are CT-based, which is computed tomography, right? It expresses a 3D picture, an X-ray, basically, of a bag, right? And we're using that technology both on the checkpoint and in checked baggage, right? The CTs have been in since 2004, 2005 timeframe. And so a lot of airports and airlines, stakeholders aside, are saying, hey, we've had these machines quite a while, so what's the next iteration of this machine? And I think it's dual-fold. Yes, they want detection, but really they want the bag faster. That's what they want. So another reason why an airline might engage with us is to say, hey, we want the next iteration of this. We want the fastest equipment that you have. And so myself as a capability manager for TSA, it's one of the windows in that I have is where are we on the innovation scale and where are we on the next newest technology that we can get, right? Well, for us in baggage, I'll just tell you, we don't expect there to be a new technology per se. It's the same technology, but it's, again, with faster components, right? Because computing is getting faster. So the parts of that process or the parts of the EDS itself are newer, they're faster, etc. Now, we have a rough time frame in mind of about 2030. And the reason for that is it's a lot of things. It's funding. It's the testing that has to occur because it takes a long time, and especially with baggage, even though we're trying to accelerate the process as much as possible. However, funding issues, the certification of the machines, all of that takes a lot of time because we really only have a couple of labs that can do that.
And we're talking about national security, so it's not something you want to rush to.
Rome wasn't built in a day, right? That all comes to mind, right? But again, we understand that everybody would like to have this now. And it's just that switch can't happen fast enough. And it's partly it's just government, it's red tape. It's the fact that the funding doesn't flow as readily as it used to. One of the big wins, though, I think for TSA has been the CTs and the checkpoint. Even though everyone says they're too slow, we're getting, though, the best detection that we've ever had in the checkpoint with those units. And so once we can live with the speed of them and dial that into the whole passenger flow, everything is going to sync much better. And then our plans for the future are to, again, increase the efficiency of those operations with newer equipment.
Earlier this year, I was at Orlando Airport getting a tour behind the scenes, and the makeup area for the TSA was impressive. But I also thought it was a little bit over-engineered. A lot of stations where only 2 or 3 were manned. I can imagine there is a difference between a new airport with sufficient funding, etc., and airports that have to deal with high volumes in an old location, but also remote locations with not that much traffic. How do you look at that?
So I'd look at it as, yes, there are airports that could step up a little bit with the newer construction and newer parts of the airport that would help with efficiency. Because we still are looking at, even on the baggage side, right, we're looking at old infrastructure that we're really just trying to put a new coat of paint on. But there are newer airports that I think that are working well if they've incorporated like an ICS system or something like that. But to your point, the airports that are investing, I think, are the ones that you see that, hey, look, this TSA space is really working well. It's efficient because they are incorporating the designs, the latest designs. We have documents that lay this out for the industry to say that, hey, if you're going to design a checkpoint or if you're going to design a checked baggage system, these are the elements in which you will use.
And to also keep in mind that when those designs are put in place, they're based on the max throughput for that airport.
They do an excellent job in Orlando, and many airports would love to have something similar. But I can also hear that it's a funding issue from the TSA.
It doesn't mean the airport can't do it. They just can't do it with TSA funds.
So let's get more funds for the TSA then.
Yeah, I would love that. Let's take this show on the road, and we'll get up to Capitol Hill, and we'll put it on the steps.
That's where we need to be in Washington, I guess.
And we're making that connections with the stakeholders. A lot of them were saying, hey, we realize that we're not getting the funding levels that really the industry would like to see and for us to grow and become more efficient and effective. I think the effectiveness gains that we have, I think, are good, but it always turns to efficiency very quickly, right? They're like, okay, yeah, great, you can detect things, and we like that, but it's a really slow process. And so we have to say, yes, it is. And so the funding is sort of geared like that. They'll give us the funding for the best detection a lot of times, but it's not necessarily for faster right now. We would like there to be, though, more of a R&D type of funding for TSA. We do get a little bit right now, but again, that could be much better. If we look at it in terms of in the past, there was a flood of money, certainly right after 9/11 because of that, right? And so, I mean, obviously people have already put it together. They're like, oh, so it takes an incident to drive money. And we wouldn't like to see that, right? We really don't. But we need to maintain our levels of research and development.
And how much do you need?
Well, geez, if you're going to write me a check, it's hard to put a number on it. But, just to give you an idea, each one of those systems that we're going to be putting in, costs $1 million plus, right? You think about the model, for example, that Europe or other countries might have as opposed to the United States, right? In Europe, the airports traditionally buy the equipment, and then there's a regulator in between. So, I've often thought, well, why can't our system be that way, right? Why does the TSA fund all of the equipment? And it's because it's been so close hold, I think, close to the vest. So as far as the, what are the detection standards? What things are we needing to ensure are certified and incorporated into these machines? And I think the reality is that, once that work is done and we've got that pretty well figured out, we can still have the industry buy, airlines, airports. We do have a gifting program at TSA, right? So there is that ability. I don't think it's ever been exercised on checked baggage, at least not in my time. We haven't seen gifting of the checked baggage units, but it certainly has happened on the checkpoint side. And so it's one of the things that I talk about a lot with industry is say, well, why don't we just turn this on its head a little bit? And if you want to purchase the units, I think we can work with that. We have bailment agreements. We have all kinds of things that we could do to enable that.
You're talking about the machines. It's never just one machine, but there's always at least a backup. And based on how many bags go through for peak times, then you have to have enough machines to handle all of that. So you're calling out $1 million. In reality, it's probably closer, for Orlando, I have to imagine that's probably closer to $20 million. There's a requirement in the U.S. If you're checking your bag, you need to be at the airport at least an hour before that flight, and then it's cut off. If you miss that cutoff time, you can no longer check your bag. How much of that hour is taken up by security screening?
Not much. As long as the airline can get it, we're saying at an hour. If the airline gets it on the bag belt and down to us and through the machine, and even if we were to have an issue with it and it went into the physical search area, and let's just say there's no problem with it, right? They're not finding something that they need to take swift action on. That whole process would take no more than, say, 15 minutes.
And that whole process, when we talk about, there's 3 different levels of screening possible?
So the bag goes on the belt, goes behind the wall, and of course that's the last time the passenger sees it until, we hope, when they get to where they're going. That's not a guarantee, not guaranteeing, right? And it may have some distance to go, but it's certainly not in tens of minutes. It's going to get to the EDS machine probably within about 2 to 3 minutes after it's dropped. So it goes through the EDS machine, produces a picture for someone to look at, and that's only if the bag is alarmed or there's a suspected item or something within the bag. That's our level 2, where a person then sees that image and then decides, is that something that needs to be looked at further? Does it need to go into the physical search area, which is the level 3? But in a perfect world, everybody packing their bag accordingly so that it doesn't set off the bells and whistles, that whole process would take no more than probably 5 to 7 minutes for a bag to completely clear. Now, there is downline sort that has to happen, right? And a lot of these airports, they're large. So it's probably going to have some travel time to get to where it can ultimately be sorted by an airline. Then from there, it's a waiting game. Where does the bag need to go? Someone needs to probably pick it up, put it on a cart, and it's transferred then to the aircraft where it's loaded. So that entire process maybe is 20 minutes.
I think we need to make a distinction between the passenger experience here and the baggage experience. We are talking about checked bags and what the main audience sees at the gate before they go into the terminal, how a TSA agent is checking everybody. But let's focus a little bit on the checked bags, because indeed it goes through the wall and it's gone. It happened to me that my bag was opened. Got a love note in it.
You had the love note inside? Yeah.
And of course, with my family, I completely understand I'm profiled. But can you tell me a little bit more about the frequency on how that happens and how can we educate the passenger a little bit to prevent that from happening?
One of the things that will automatically trigger an EDS or someone's visual cues is electronics. So very complex electronics, whether it's laptops, whether it's gaming consoles, that kind of thing. All of those being in checked baggage will ultimately have your bag looked at, and personally by someone. So it's not a question of if, it will. And so I'm not saying don't check that stuff, but again, I've never been one to check my laptop anyway, and I don't know that some people are, but the idea that I could walk through any bag room nowadays in an airport and I can go through and pick out on the screens why are they looking at that bag. It's because they have a laptop in there. And that's what we always say. We're so surprised at how many of the bags have laptops in them.
Yeah, and for me, it's not even the price of the laptop. It's all of the data that is on that laptop. If my bag goes missing, I'm not in a good spot.
So then we're faced to kind of ask, well, are they traveling with multiple laptops? And so they decide to check one because they have others, more than one, maybe on their person, and they're traveling through the checkpoint with them. So just that little nugget. And again, they're not prohibited. I'm not saying that. But if you were being smart about it and saying, I really want my bag to try to get through without any hassle whatsoever, then I wouldn't put any complex anything in there. It's electronic items. It's obviously non-disclosed firearms is going to be an issue for you.
You guys still pull a lot of guns.
So we do find them, and it's, again, a process, right? It's not that the airline, doesn't know, right? They have a disclaimer or a sign, right, that you read when you check your bag that says, you will disclose firearms, and not everybody does. So it's just another issue where some might say, oh, the TSA, I can't believe, again, they've got this propensity to delay me in my bag every time I turn around. Well, what are you putting in your bag that's having that effect?
You have mentioned to me in previous conversations about One Stop. Can you explain a little bit about what that program is and where it's at today and what you're trying to accomplish?
Yes, it is very much a passenger experience issue where if you are traveling, mostly I'm going to say from overseas back to the United States, because even though this will be a two-way street at some point, we're starting with the fact that we're looking at passengers coming from last points of departure from other countries into the United States, and we're working with them to harmonize standards. Okay, and by that I mean that there's certain algorithms and certain detection standards that are at play, especially if I'm talking about checked baggage, but it's also inherent in the checkpoint, that the countries that we're working the most closely with probably do have a lot of the standards, but they might not have all of them. So the idea is, nowadays, I'll just put it in terms of how you travel now, right? You travel from the country, wherever the last point of departure is. They screen your bag, they screen you, everything like that. You travel over, you come to the United States, and yes, go through customs, but again, repeat that same process that you just went through.
So bags then arriving in the United States are reintroduced to the sortation system so they can go through our security clearance because the country it came from doesn't have the same high standards that we do.
And it may, and it just hasn't been looked at. So the idea is we don't know 100%, so we're just going to rescreen it, and then we know. That was the perception or the idea back at that time. We've since had agreements with like Canada, for example, where it's called pre-clearance. Now that moved everything to the border, like the customs agents at CBP and the TSA's standards and detection and everything like that were inherent in their machines. And so that happened at the border. That way, when you're entering the United States, you're not going through that. So, an example would be flying from any Canadian city. If it's Winnipeg into Chicago, you've pre-cleared everything when you left Winnipeg. So when you come into Chicago, if you're having to travel on to, say, to D.C., then you're not having to go through the customs experience and your bag is not going through screening. So it's that idea, but we haven't inked those pre-clearance deals with some of the countries that we're talking about nowadays. So the idea being that you don't have to recheck your bag once you come to the United States. You don't have to bring your person through screening again. That's the one-stop security aspect.
It sounds like music in my ears and will help the industry very well. And it sounds to me like pretty cool innovation, actually. It's partly process, but there's also a technology component, I guess, here. If you send out all the information that's captured, for example, in Amsterdam, which you could do as well. Yes. Makes it a lot more easy when you have a connection in the US.
Yeah, coming back from London a couple months ago, I think I was in baggage claim for an hour and a half. So I'd already gone through everything I needed to for me personally, but then sitting and waiting for my baggage because it had to go through a much longer process.
Yeah, and that's hand in hand with customs too. We need to make sure that this process is working, and that's why it's taking a little bit of time to work the bugs out of it. The CBP would love nothing more than to be able to see a picture of everybody's bag ahead of time, and I mean the inside of the bag. They do have the capability already to see the outside, but again, the inside of the bag is what we're talking about, right?
Your point pointing something out that's close to my heart.
Yeah, okay. So the idea is they want to be able to know what it is that they should be looking at when the passenger is in front of them. Right now, really all they have to go on in today's world is that it's a behavior issue or it's something of that nature where they're going to pull you aside, or how you answer questions about what you're bringing back with you to declare. The idea is if they had a picture of that, if we had a cooperative agreement with the country that they left where the picture of the bag, the inside of the bag, could be seen by customs, as well as the TSA, when we needed to, then that makes for a much better passenger experience because they come in, they maybe hand their passport to the customs, and in a perfect world, they would just be, okay, great, you're coming into the country, your bag is already through, it's on its way to its next flight. If that's what you're doing is connecting, once you get to the United States.
I look forward to that. I'm a part of global entry, so I breeze through, and then I just sit and wait. So taking away one issue, but now I have more time to sit and think about how long it's taking to get my bag to the carousel.
I believe there is some real-life testing on this, right, to Australia, is that correct?
The test bed is with Seoul. It's Incheon right now. Okay. And so the hope is that will show that we can do this, that the images are being brought over from the machines that are screening them there, and then they're put into a cloud environment, and then the CBP can look at them, the TSA can look at them. Again, it's a very cooperative type of environment. But on its face, if they had the same standard in Incheon that we have, we really wouldn't need to see the inside of the bag. As long as they were good with what they saw, then it's screened to the standard.
What I'm hearing you say is there's a lot of innovation going on,
there
actually.
Is.
And the perception, possibly by passengers, but also in the industry, that you're an innovation blocker and that you make the life of baggage innovation more difficult than necessary. But the opposite is true, if I am hearing you correctly.
I would say that. Having a front seat on innovation for checked baggage, I think there's more that we can do, even inside the United States, for example. I would love to see additional ICS systems at airports that would make things faster and better. Like one of the largest culprits for us, maybe back to your main issues question, is that with older systems in airports, we have what we call a lot of unknown bags. What that means is they are tracked, but through the course of them being carried and conveyed to different parts of the airport, they shuffle around and they become non-trackable for us. And it's just because the technology that was being used at that time was say a window that was on a conveyor belt. The bag gets shuffled out of that, then it no longer is able to be tracked. So it may show up to the TSO as unknown, meaning they can't pair an image with what they're seeing in front of them. And that really delays the process. And that's an older technology type of problem. So when you figure that we have a lot of older infrastructure within the United States, we would love to see additional newer systems or at least updated systems where we could have that tracking.
Yeah, and you mentioned ICS, which stands for Individual Carrier System. And in that, instead of bags just making their journey on a belt and being diverted, merged in multiple ways, each bag is placed into a tote and has its own identification, even beyond the baggage tag that's there for identification and knowledge of where that bag is within the system. Exactly. So I just wanted to share that for others.
Yes, I have to keep remembering the acronyms that we have in this environment.
We are an acronym-heavy industry for sure.
If we're talking about the budget, let's go back to that just a moment, if you want. Obviously, there are a lot of goals that you see, the baggage 2030, but we need to look ahead way further than that. With the amount of passengers that will be flying, the growth of airlines, we are here with United Airlines. They are taking delivery of a plane every single week. That means that there will be more passengers all the time. How does TSA adapt to that?
Well, I think for myself and my area, I have a roadmap that takes me out to at least 2040 that talks about what kinds of things will we see in checked baggage, what do we need to be ready for, what is the innovation. And so I talk about how I think we're going to handle the volume of checked baggage, but that also assumes that there's an investment. And I think TSA's approach has been it's one at a time. It's one area at a time. As a TSA entity, we're not funded to the point where we can do both of those things. So I would really look forward to, and maybe this podcast will help.
Greg, I loved having you on the show, giving an insight, a behind the scene of your work. It's fascinating to me.
It is, and there's a lot of frustrating things within an airport, but when it comes to security, I can suck it up a little bit, and so I really appreciate you giving us some background on what you guys are doing to keep us safe.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thanks to Craig Mosford. I think it's interesting to understand what the TSA really has to do with us and our baggage at an airport.
Next time, we are continuing our conversations in Chicago, speaking to Darren Juby. He's the chairman of the Baggage Innovation Working Group from the Future Travel Experience. You can check out more episodes of at thebagfather.com or by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts.
And don't forget to get in touch on the website to tell us your baggage-related experiences and mishaps. In the meantime, thank you for listening and join us next time for more baggage-related conversation with the Bag Father.